I would request Dr. Shukla, Mr. Vats, and Dr. Niranjan to stay back on the dais. As I invite Mr. Neelkanth Mishra, Chief Economist, Axis Bank, and Mr. Dharmakirti Joshi, Chief Economist, CRISIL, to take the Viksit Bharat dialogue further as we present a panel discussion on Viksit Bharat at 2047, Blueprint for a Developed India.
For the introduction, many thanks to Bombay Chamber for organizing this. So good to see so many people turning out on a wintry weekend in December to listen to this panel. It's a pleasure to be moderating this important and a crucial discussion on the road to Viksit Bharat, the Prime Minister's clarion call. I think we heard Mr. Birla mention about what we saw yesterday, right? A young kid, 18-year-old kid, Gukesh, beating a Chinese player. Now, that can be emblematic, as he said. It really bodes well. Think of it this way, in terms of a setting. India and China really competing for the top place in the economic history of the world, right? And I think what we found yesterday was more than just a young champion, right? Or the youngest chess champion, world champion. I think we also found some lead indicator of India's economic rankings or the way it will pan out going forward. Giving you the chess example, the chess analogy, in 2002, we were ranked 10th in the world in terms of number of grandmasters in chess. 10 years later, we were 5th in terms of that rank, and the GDP rank was 11 from 12 earlier, the decade before that. 2024, we were ranked 2nd and in terms of the chess grandmasters, and in terms of GDP, we are now 5th and just about there reaching at the 4th spot. So I think we have a good lead indicator in terms of chess and Gukesh as to what really is going to happen going forward. As we crystal gaze towards the future, I think also important to really pause and reflect on the history or the golden past. I'm sure many of you have read William Dalrymple's latest book and how India's ideas, goods, men, very entrepreneurial and intellectuals really spread the idea of India, and we really conquered China, Asia, and many other parts of the world without any bloodshed. And that gives us the confidence in terms of really repeating that going forward as well. But let me caution you, I mean, we are living in very, very polarized times. Any debate on the economy, any projections, there are two camps. One is the hyper bullish that no matter what, we are going to be achieving a particular number and will become developed just like that. The other is that you can see nothing better and the Ashok Modi sort of India can do nothing right, that sort of a narrative. What this report is doing is that it is taking a dispassionate analytical view and looking at the roadmap and the building blocks of a developed country. The positive narrative goes something like this, and this, I mean, a lot of people quote Lawrence Summers when he said, Europe and Japan are museums, and let me add, the EU is also the Silicon Valley of regulation now. China is probably an open jail, and India, I mean, it's only a matter of when and not if. As far as some of the other economies go, including that of China, we've seen the best of them behind. We are seeing Europe in a decline in terms of productivity, in terms of growth. And we have seen many of these engines really fail. And it's only a matter of compounding, and India is going to be really doubling every 6, 7 years. If we grow nominally 11, 12%, every 6, 7 years, this economy is going to grow and double. On the negative side, I think we have a continental population to take care of, right? We need to generate anywhere between 8 to 12 million jobs a year, depending on which number you're citing, which report you're reading. We have to really take care of healthcare of a large population. We really need to educate people. We really need to skill people. And not many economies or countries have really been able to do that in such a short span of time, right? And that really is the dilemma. If I were to look at the growth and the narrative that we have, growth is anything but linear, right? If you look at what's happened in the world before, we are seeing many of these mega engines really sputtering. Look at the German economy, right? The autobahns and the manufacturing miracle just collapsing. The Chinese miracle is over. The French cannot really achieve anything even though they're trying to spend their way out of trouble. And similarly, so many of these examples the world over. This year's Nobel Prize winner, and also there's a book I'm sure many of you have referred, Why Nations Fail. And that has many stories that really caution in terms of linear extrapolation of some of these miracles, right? But there are events that can really catalyze or change things. The bubonic plague was one such, right? 14th century. It really changed the face of Western Europe. It changed the history of the world because there was a sudden shortage of labor. Half the population died in a very, very short span of time. So can we look at post-COVID world as such a moment for India? And I think that could probably be a good starting point to start this discussion. I'll start with Niranjan. You've been one of the principal authors of this report. Growth for the sake of growth is the philosophy of cancer cell, as they say, right? What is it that we are going to be achieving with this growth? And when we economists talk about growth versus development, what is the real distinction? What is it that we need to understand in this Viksit Bharat, developed India? And is the per capita income the right thing to look at? Is it the GDP number or the Human Development Index? I mean, there are multiple things that one can look at. How do you really describe or help us understand this?
Yeah, so thank you, Sachchidanand. See, obviously, Viksit Bharat, the first way to look at it is, as Sudhir mentioned, average incomes, right? Because there is the size of the economy, but in that sense, because we are a large population, the size of the economy sometimes exaggerates our, economic situation. Then there is average incomes. And I think that's the lodestone according to me. But Viksit Bharat does not just mean a developed economy, it means a developed society as well, right? And actually in some of the Prime Minister's own statements, he has said that, that it's also Samaj, it's not just the economy. Now the question whether GDP per capita captures everything is a philosophical question. And see, right from the beginning when, in the 30s when GDP was first calculated, people like Simon Kuznets or Colin Clark, etc., it was always very clear that GDP is a measure of output. It is not a measure of welfare. So there are some people who say, yeah, so they should we bother about GDP so much? But my counter argument is that per capita GDP actually correlates perfectly with lots of human development indices, So you cannot be a sort of well-functioning society unless you have a certain level of average income. So it's both. People have more money to invest in their own human capital, in their homes, etc., and governments have more taxes to spend on social security and infrastructure, etc. So I don't think this is actually much of a debate. You cannot give every person a good life in India unless you grow your economy rapidly. And it's there in the report, right? It's HDI and GDP per capita are almost perfectly correlated with each other. It's like a 45-degree line, you know. Now, you can say that within various income categories, there are some countries which do better than us. You know, Bangladesh versus India, we hear all these things. And there are certain efficiency gains by fixing governance, by fixing problems on the ground. But in the sweep of history, I think the way to reach higher levels of human welfare mean ways to reach higher levels of GDP per capita. So I give immense importance to GDP per capita, at least at this stage of our development.
Thanks. I think that leads to the next question. Neelkanth, in terms of the GDP growth numbers, we are at a time when everybody started to question India's GDP growth rate and the likes of BBC and everybody has jumped at the Q2 numbers and everybody is starting to question the growth trajectory, right? What, in your opinion, is the sustainable growth rate that India can really achieve? And what are the challenges? Because if you look at some of the examples, I mean, the choices that you make, the political environment and the global environment and the mega trends, that can make a huge difference to what India can really achieve. And some of the others who've done, and as Mr. Kapadia pointed out, there are a few who've achieved these numbers and there are 34 in the other cohort who can probably make it and India can do so. So what, in your opinion, is a sustainable, I mean, we call it the potential growth rate, but what do you think is the sustainable or the right number to think about and any challenges that you foresee?
Thanks, Sachchidanand. I would like to frame the question I'll break the question into three parts. One is that in the last 30 years, if you look at a 5-year CAGR, the growth rate has been between 6 and 7%. There was one period where we reached close to 8%, but it's been mostly between 6 and 7. So based on history, you would say, well, that's a decent trend growth for India. I think that would be a mistake because the nature of growth itself has changed. So 20 years back, our labor force was growing very rapidly. In the 80s and 90s, a very large part of the GDP growth was actually coming from just labor input. So you had more workers, and that is why that growth wasn't a lot of fun, because per capita wasn't changing. So things start changing when, as Niranjan was saying, the per capita starts to change. That's when, consumption behavior, savings behavior, healthcare needs, etc., I mean, all of those start to change. That's the first prism I would look through. The second is that the trend growth can be also, I mean, in manifesting itself in like year-on-year trends, will also get affected by your fiscal and monetary policies. Because you can be over tight, you can be over loose, you can be stimulating at some point. The growth slowdown that in my view we have seen in the first half, especially the second quarter, is completely a cyclical growth slowdown, which is self-inflicted. This is policy errors made one after another. We have, I think, inadvertently tightened the fiscal too aggressively. And on the monetary side, I think we have allowed credit to tighten too sharply. So on the fiscal side, just for the sake of the audience, the central government in the first half of a fiscal year generally incurs about 62% of its full year fiscal deficit. This year, it incurred only about 29%. Now, this was an election year, things started slowly. If you remember, this year the election happened 1 month later than usual. The budget was presented 20-25 days later than usual. So all of those played a role, but either way, if you have 33% slippage just in the first half on a 4.9% of GDP base, you're talking about a 1.6 percent point of GDP fiscal consolidation squeezed into 6 months. Obviously, the economy slowed. But this was not by itself, this was not the only thing we did. We also managed to slow our credit growth down from 17% to less than 11%. So if you have a 6 percent point slowdown in credit growth, which economy will be able to withstand it? So there's suddenly everyone is in pain. So default rates are going up and a lot of pain has started. The good thing is that now corrective action is underway. Our systems respond with a lag, but they do. So we have seen a CRR cut, which should help deposit growth. We have seen basically money come into the economy. The fiscal spending is picking up. I think that 7% is the right growth rate when we think about the next 3 to 5 years. This was a framework I gave in the budget discussion at the Bombay Chambers thing in July this year, which is about 1.2% coming from labor input, about 1.5 to 2% coming from total factor productivity, and about 4% coming from capital input, because the real estate cycle and the power generation cycle are turning up. However, when we are talking about 2047, I think it would be extremely risky to project it for 20, 25 years. Because any country which has managed to break out of the middle income trap or has been able to sustain this growth has reformed continuously. So while the current slowdown is slightly easier to reverse because it was all just about the nature of spending and some tweaking of financial levers, I think the challenges, and I'm sure we'll discuss that in the rest of the panel, are much more severe as we think about the next 25. So I don't think 7% can sustain beyond 3 to 5 years if we don't keep doing reforms.
So what Neelkanth seems to be suggesting is, as we navigate the world going forward, there are three mega trends that are playing out, right? Deglobalization, decarbonization, and there is depopulation or the demographic challenges that a continent is facing as we speak. In terms of decarbonization, and now I come to DK, climate change seems to be one of the biggest impediments when it comes to charting out the growth story, especially the decades ahead. India seems to be one of the most challenged. The agriculture and some of the other aspects seem to be the most challenged when you look at a cohort of such economies. How do you see this going forward? How do you see this really impacting not just the GDP or the numbers, but also in terms of livelihoods, agricultural output, and some of these other related areas?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thanks, Bombay Chamber, for inviting me. Climate is an issue. Actually, 2023 was the hottest year globally. And India had the second hottest year since 1901. And this year, again, promises to be the hottest year. So it is having material effect in many areas. We can talk about that. But I want to also point out that India is also changing its nature of growth. It is trying to move away from services-led to more industry-led. It is trying to create more infrastructure. Both of these are carbon-intensive. So its structure of growth is itself becoming carbon-intensive. And it has a challenge of decarbonizing while it tries to grow fast, which I don't think any country in history has done so far. Most of the countries merrily polluted their way out. So climate was not an issue. I think 10 years back, I wouldn't be talking about climate when I talked about economic outlook. So it's a new thing. We can split this problem into two parts. One is decarbonization, which means you reduce your carbon footprint as you grow. The second is, I think, which is a bigger challenge right now, is the adaptation, because even if you decarbonize, the disruptions from climate will continue to play out. And those are more binding because those are happening on a very regular, high frequency basis. So as far as the first part is concerned, the decarbonization path, I think we have what we refer to as trilemma in energy economics, which is you have energy security on one side, you have affordability on the other, and the third is sustainability. So only when you have energy security and affordability, then you start thinking about sustainability. And so 2023 was a year of return of energy security, by the way. We all talk about. This is a view from our energy specialist, Daniel Yergin. The thing is that unless, so there is a trade-off. I think if you are energy insecure and if it is not affordable, then I think sustainability takes a back seat. And we've seen it play out in the post-Russia-Ukraine conflict period. Europe managed to wean itself away from the Russian oil, but at what cost? The Germany's got very severely hit, and they may or may not recover. I think the outlook is extremely bad. So and those are rich countries. So a poor country like India, which is on its high growth trajectory, and we're talking about all these targets, if it doesn't focus on growth itself, then I think the energy security is, as I said, is extremely important, because about 89% of our oil is imported. So we have to focus on making, I think, on the security part. S&P has projected that it will become 96% imports by 2035. So energy security is a very critical issue for us. And I think my sense is that the path that 80% of the world will adopt is going to be based on energy security getting more weight, energy affordability getting more weight, then energy sustainability. Only when these two are sorted, you'll focus on sustainability. India is moving fast. Technology can make you move faster on that. We've seen what has happened with solar replacing wind, and 17% of our capacity is solar now. So clearly, I think the point I'm trying to make is that in this trilemma of, you need to, I think for India, it's important to focus equally on security and affordability than it is on sustainability. So it has to work its balance out, and that way we have done a very pragmatic option. We've taken a pragmatic route. We will be carbon neutral by 2070, not by 2050. And by the way, even the Western world, they're not on their target to 1.5 degrees above, which was considered a danger mark. I think they'll probably hit 2.5 if the way energy transition is taking place. So this is one aspect. The second, I think, aspect is with respect to, and by the way, energy transition also means that all the assets that are locked in your thermal plants, etc., they'll get marked down immediately, and that has implications for the financial sector. So all those are costs which are involved. And there are many others, I think, in terms of livelihoods, the state of where you have coal mines, etc. If they are shut, how do you rehabilitate them? That's a challenge. And these are in poorer parts. I mean, they're not the richer parts of India. So there are many challenges. So India will chug along as far as the transition is concerned. If there is a breakthrough in technology, you can move faster. And if that technology is shared with us, you can even move much faster. The adaptation part to me is very critical right now. We all saw monetary policy a few days back where I think the interest rates were not cut because I think food inflation is high. If you see the trajectory of food inflation, agriculture follows the laws of nature. I mean, if there is heat, the production will shrivel. I mean, it will go down. It cannot wean itself off that. In 2023, during the winter months, the vegetable prices, which typically come down, did not come down in India. And that was to do with, I think, partly to do with the climate effects. I mean, heat waves, excess. Even this year, I think climate have had a material impact on influencing the vegetable prices. Vegetables have a very short crop cycle. They correct very quickly, but this time they haven't corrected. There are other factors also at play, but climate is also a factor which is at play for agriculture. So for that, I think all the things that we've been talking about, whether it is food processing or it is climate-resistant agriculture or it is supply chains, when there is extreme heat, as it was in the month of June in Delhi, your vegetables will go bad. I mean, it's known. I mean, they won't last a week. They would go back in 2 days. So I think you need these things much more because India is probably the most vulnerable country in South Asia, probably in Asia itself, actually. So I think the point here is that the adaptability part becomes very, very, very critical, and how you do it, and you'll have to allocate more and more. So RBI couldn't cut rates partly because the climate played a spoil sport. Microfinance companies, I think there was some talk on that. I think I was in Rajasthan last year, and we were talking to some microfinance companies. They said we could not collect. I mean, that is why the delinquency is high. We couldn't collect our dues because most of the people who work outside, they couldn't work during those months, and these collection agents who typically do 100 kilometers a day in a motorcycle, they couldn't do more than 30, 40 kilometers. So the delinquencies of the microfinance, they're charging high rates, that's true, but I think the delinquency also rose because of a climate shock. So these are just two examples. There are several examples one can cull out. So the point is that how you will have to allocate incrementally higher resources to adaptation, because this is right here and now. The benefits of decarbonization will be very visible after a very long time. So I think the way, and this can be pretty disruptive in a country which has such a large population, so many mouths to feed, and so on and so forth. So let me stop there. I think I've spoken more.
Thanks for adding one more trilemma. ये भी याद रखना पड़ेगा. Moving on to technology, I mean, a lot of chatter, and especially when you look at India Inc., a lot of experts have been pointing out as to how low R&D investments are. End of the day, I mean, developed whatever GDP number we have, it all boils down to productivity-led growth, right? If we don't have that, and if it is not fired by innovation, if we don't really spend enough on R&D, we spend just about 0.7% of GDP on R&D. How do we take this productivity narrative, especially the private sector, which is the catalyst or the creator of jobs and growth? How do you see that, Mr. Vats?
Thanks, Sachchidanand. I think before I start, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Artha team, once again, Niranjan, Shilpa, and her young team for a wonderful report, The Road to Viksit Bharat, and I'll once again request you to read it. I think yes, and I think you will read it in our report as well. You know, innovation is the beating heart of an advanced economy. I also want to give you a small anecdote. About 15 odd years back, I was sitting in a room like this, but not in India, but in Shenzhen, in China. And as is, and there were a bunch of CEOs. And as is very typical of China, you see the mayor of that city would invariably find time to meet you for breakfast, for dinner, whatever. So I think in their conversation, the thing which they emphasized on a lot, Sachchidanand, as you said, and this was about 15 years back, is that there are a couple of areas they thought they were behind US, and they clearly said innovation and R&D is something which we need to work on. And there were a couple of other things. And they also said that this also has to be coupled with an enabling environment, and they talked about, and we were in Shenzhen, so they talked about Hong Kong, Macau, Shenzhen. I think that being a large urban agglomerate, and they talked about that urban agglomerate being about 100 million urban agglomerate, which will be extremely well connected with road, water, air, and you can see now how beautifully, and rail, how beautifully they've they said that that will be the open part, which will foster innovation. So I think, and they've worked towards that. They've achieved some parts. You also now see, because particularly when it comes to AI, when it comes to some of these other elements, China arguably clean energy, and I think with a little bit of benefit of some of the things which are there, but they're arguably ahead of the world, I think, and maybe competing with the best. I think in our case, you are absolutely right. I think the number is low at 0.6. And I think we got to keep on dialing this up. Not only is the number low, I think the other thing you will also see in the report is that the public-private component of this R&D investment is inverse for India. So the number is low, But 70% of that number comes from public investment, and only about 30% comes from private investment. In most other economies, it's the other way around. But I think there are a couple of heartening factors I want to point out, and I think the first is that India being, as of now, low middle income economy, does not behave like most low middle income economies. I think, it's an economy which has a mix of what you would see in most low middle income economies, which is largely natural resource led, kind of growth and so on and so forth. But there is also highly sophisticated, both talent, which Mr. Birla spoke about, but also industry and so on and so forth. So that's one heartening factor. So therefore, we would be able to build on that. I think the second thing is also the journey from a low middle income economy to a upper middle income economy, in any case will bring in, has by definition is likely to bring in more innovation. And I think what needs to be, in my opinion, done a little bit more as we go forward is, one, IP, we need to keep on working on IP and IP protection. I think that's an important piece. There is recognition of it, we need to do more of that piece, and that's going to be important for innovation. Because you need to protect what you have, and I think that regime has to become better. It is improving, but it needs to get better. I think the second thing is the industry, academia partnerships, I think are not as strong as they are in other parts of the world. So I think that is another area where we need to move the needle. Fortunately, the good news is that there again, especially with some premier institutes, the needle is moving. IIT Madras, IIT Bombay to some extent, some of these, but they're doing wonderful work, and we are personally associated as an organization with some of them. So I think now we are beginning to see a lot of that piece happening. So that's an important ingredient as we move forward on building on innovation. I think the overall government, industry, academia piece, so therefore making sure that the curriculum and academics is also being actually allowing this, and there is emphasis on R&D as we move forward. Lastly, from my point, I think where I'm most hopeful is that development of AI. I have a feeling that like many of the innovation centers have developed globally, India arguably also has a pretty few hubs, I think Silicon Valley being the new one, and so on and so forth, but which we heard of. But I think between Bangalore and maybe Hyderabad and so on and so forth, I think the development of AI and the coinciding with a lot of GCCs, global capability centers of the large organizations coming to India, I think is an interesting piece. We on our part as Pidilite itself have been continuously dialing this up. Our number is better than the national number. We are more than just 1% plus. But I'm aware that this number needs to move to 2 to 3%, as you see that most of the developed countries are around that 3% ballpark. There are a couple like South Korea and Israel which are at about 5 or 6. But I think there are factors which will lead us in that direction, and I think this is something which will happen. And I think if you look at, there are innovations already beginning to happen because of the digital infrastructure which is in place. For instance, quick commerce, which repositions e-commerce, is an Indian, completely Indian innovation, Indian success. I think in products also you would begin to see as we industrialize a bit more, and I'm quite hopeful as we move forward in that direction.
We heard Mr. Birla speak about BITS and the role of education, right? The human resource part. Coming back to you, Niranjan, if you look at the education and the skilling thing, I mean, as we go forward, probably skilling and reskilling becomes much more important. As we speak, only 51% graduates are employable as per some studies. I mean, this number keeps varying depending on which study you're looking at. In terms of skilling, again, the reach is just about 2.5% as you have pointed out. How do you see this evolution towards Viksit Bharat and the role of education, skilling and reskilling?
Yeah, so I think it's central to the challenge of Viksit Bharat, right? And I think Mr. Birla, as you said, mentioned the importance of talent. So if I break it up into two parts, right? One is just school education, which is preparing people for life, and then higher education, which sort of prepares you for the labor force, perhaps. I think in school education, we have crossed one important milestone. So, till about the year 2000, very few of, not enough students were going to school. I think that has been cracked, right? Means our enrollment ratios are high, etc. So, I think that issue is done. So, I think rather than the quantity of education, now we have to look at the quality of school education. And this includes school curriculum, school infrastructure. So, like how many schools, very few schools, especially in public schools, have computers and internet connectivity. Teacher absenteeism is still a huge problem. The curriculum, so, we read the Pratham report every year with, like every year it's the same story, but still we feel the angst of, students in the 7th standard can't read 3rd standard books or can't do simple division. So I think those are problems. So it's a different type of problem, but the new education policy actually takes them on quite well. So that's the first part. There's a good story about children going to school. The bad story is children not learning enough in school. On the part of the higher education, I think a lot needs to be done. I think here, there's a lot to learn from China, we just spoke about innovation, but in the past 20 years, the way China has also built its university system, they've invested in universities, they've brought talent back, etc. So I think that we need to focus on higher education more. I think one of the things which we say in the report, India-China, is that if you look at the past 100 years, most Chinese students go to technical courses, most Indian students go for humanities courses, now. Because, we are using degrees as a way to signal to the society that we have, graduate hair sort of thing, but it's not necessarily something which can be translated into a job. And I think here the government can only do so much. I think the private sector has a big role to play, So we have this network of ITIs, but I think it's much more this, apprenticeships thing which has started. I think Germany does it well, Korea does it well. So I think it's not just getting a degree, but getting a degree which helps you, be a productive worker or a productive professional is important. So a lot of our national discussion is based on budgetary allocations, right? That India spends X amount on education, it should spend 2x of that or whatever. And this is important, but I don't think that's the entire story. I think what it is being spent on is important. So I think at this stage, it's not so much about building more schools or building more colleges. I think it's the soft part of it. What are students being taught? What is the quality of the teaching, of the curriculum? I think these need to be cracked. And I think they, in the next 10, 15 years, I'm more hopeful that some of these very important changes will take place. But again, to reiterate, I think industry will have to play a very big role, both in driving curriculum change and also in providing apprenticeship opportunities, which happens in Germany best of all,
So Neelkanth, if you look at...
can I just, sorry, Neelkanth. So when DK was talking, this is one, about heat. One piece of statistic which always stays with me, and I'm astonished because he spoke about MFI workers not being able to go out, and I think, I think the L&T, the analyst meeting, I think the management said that this year we had to stop work on a lot of infrastructure projects because of the heat. 50% of the Indian labor force works under the open sun, means forget, like we sit in AC rooms, most of us, maybe some more work under fans, but 1 out of every 2 Indians works in the open sun. And that's a huge productivity shock with climate change. Anyway, that's aside Neelkanth's question.
So if you look at the role of urbanization, it's been very, very critical, contributes close to say 60% to GDP. But when you look back, it's almost astonishing that we've not been able to create as many cities. So we started off when we got independence, maybe the 4 mega cities, 60, 70 years, and we've been able to we have maybe a dozen or 14, 15 cities, and that too by population, not necessarily, I mean, the typical cities as centers of growth. How do you see this really panning out? And what are the key imperatives in this? Because this is going to be really critical in terms of achieving that GDP mark and also the developmental aspects.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was going through the lovely chapter written on urbanization in the report as well. I think it covers many of the important aspects of this, including the disproportionate amount of GDP that comes from just the top 13 districts. So cities are very productive because they bring people together, they make life much more comfortable. There's a lot of cross-ideation, labor markets are much more efficient. And then, this, as the report says, it creates new challenges of congestion, and then, beyond a point, the friction starts to outdo the productive benefits of living closely together. But as I think about urbanization's role in GDP, I think the first step is to just look at the split of capital stock. See, when you are thinking about productivity of individuals and humans, it is important to look at how much capital are we deploying so that per capita numbers start going up. A very important, so everyone thinks that capital stock means factory, machines. But a very large part of capital stock is housing. In every large country, housing and developed country, housing is a very large part of capital stock. How you live, where you live, the quality of sleep you get, the quiet that you get is actually a very, very important part of your health and your productivity. A third part, which is generally not even discussed in India, is that urban infrastructure. In fact, infrastructure is a massive, massive part of the capital stock. And we have managed to solve the problem of connecting these urban agglomerations. I think the pace at which we now build highways is quite good. I think we have managed to run ports well. Turnaround times are comparable, if not better than that of Singapore. When we were growing up, it was considered as a shame that it takes a month to unload a ship, and Singapore can do it in 2 days. Now we can do it in 24 hours, right? So we have solved some problems, railways, dedicated freight corridors. But I think we have really, really struggled to solve the problems within the cities. And it is, I think, worth, this is one of those structural reforms where I was saying that if we don't solve this, then we can shed our dreams of becoming Viksit Bharat. And that is what I call tier 3 devolution. So one of the reasons we have struggled is that till 1993, till the 73rd and 74th Amendment of the Constitution, city governments didn't even exist in the Constitution. And I think the challenge for us even today, despite 30 years after those amendments, that cities don't really have the independence they need to become developed. I think the fiscal resources that are made available, maybe China is the other extreme, they're 54, 55% of fiscal transfers happen directly to cities. In India, it's less than 5%. So the cities can't even borrow. I mean, the municipal bond market is defunct because there is no revenue against which bond investors can lend to cities and build infrastructure. All of us in Mumbai, I think there's only one, I can hear the ahs and the excitement that you can get from Churchgate to Breach Candy in 8 minutes. You can get from Nariman Point to BKC entrance. I'm not talking about beyond that. In 20 minutes, of course, within BKC, it'll take you 40 minutes. It took me 30 minutes to come from my house in Lower Parel to this place. So the point being that how infrastructure can really improve productivity. And I think we've struggled. So unless we can solve these, and these are hard political problems. And so we can just keep, because even real estate development will not happen if you don't have urban infrastructure. There's no, affordable housing is an oxymoron. Because if you build a cheap house in Dombivli and you don't give connectivity, it is not going to be occupied. It's not. But if you build Atal Setu, I know of people, now these are real life anecdotes, I know of people who struggle to find a good house, affordable house in Shivdi, Parel area. And then they said, it takes 20 minutes to cross it on the other side. So now they have a nice sea-facing apartment at 30,000 rupees rent, 3-bedroom. Now the landlord wants to throw him out because the rents have doubled. But the point is that this is what infrastructure does. And I think we have, what we have managed to do with the coastal road and the metro rail in Mumbai needs to be done for 1,000 cities in India. And that's something that will not just, the construction of that infrastructure creates a lot of jobs. If you overdo it, you get into the problem that China is, that you have a lot of savings of households and individuals invested in those, and those are not productive. So now there are 50, 55-year-olds who have put all their savings into real estate or into these wealth management products which have financed this infrastructure, and that money is never coming back. And that's a huge, huge problem. So we need to be prudent about it, but if we manage it well, I think that's the only way to get to Viksit Bharat.
That was quite candid, and no offense to Dombili folks, right? DK, I think as a mark or a token of our friendship, I'll pose the easiest question to you, right? Okay. The jobs challenge, right? I started off by saying the kind of challenge we have is enormous, right? Very few countries have been able to do that over time. And as we speak, I think this is problem number one or question number one for anybody in this world, any politician, any economy in the world. And doesn't matter really what stage of development you're in. How do you see this whole jobs challenge? How are we going to get these 8 to 12 million in terms of sheer numbers and the quality?
Well, I think in terms of numbers, I think everybody is in one way or the other employed in India. I think the unemployment rate itself is very low. You have to survive to work. So the definition of employment also matters. And here I think the major problem is underemployment. I think the people are not productively employed. So that number we don't measure, but probably that would be much larger. So I think, as Niranjan was also pointing out, see there are some basic problems. I think that there is a big skill mismatch. It's not that there are not enough jobs, but you would vouch for it. I think going by L&T experience, you don't get enough workers. I think plumbers, electricians is a known story that you never get enough of them because it's not considered respectable to get a plumbing diploma or an electrician's diploma, whereas getting a BA bachelor's degree, which will not fetch you a job, still is regarded very highly. And one of my friends who works in this area, I'll not name him, but he said that they did a study and found that the prospects for marriage of a graduate are much higher than of a diploma. So I think that also from a social perspective also it plays out. So I think we need to somehow create respectability for these jobs. Why are these jobs not given respect? I think so. Why is it so important in Germany or in other parts of the world, and why is it not here? So I think so. There are skill gaps in this. I think you need people, but you don't have. Then talk to anybody who's setting up a hospital. The first headache they have is paramedics. Because nurses, I think at least the hospitals I've spoken to, I think they tell me that this is one of the major challenges because most of them go abroad. And the world is aging and they need healthcare professionals, they need physiotherapists, etc. So all the trained staff is running away, and which is not a bad thing. So I think maybe we need to train more people who can bring in remittance and also work in the domestic economy. So I think these are some of the things where I think you can plug the job gap, I mean, or plug the skill mismatch that you have. But apart from that, I think the kind of numbers of people that we have and the structure of the economy that we have is very difficult to absorb people out of the labor into the manufacturing. They can't plug into the services that are playing out. I think that not all of them can get into the services, particularly technology related. And then on top of that, we have the additional challenge from artificial intelligence, etc., which is being talked about, and I think we really don't know how it's going to impact, but I'm no expert in that, except that I have gone a one-day training in AI, and also I think I'm trying to do some use cases here and there, which most corporates are trying to do. But I think what I learned from talking to people and also to our SNP's chief artificial intelligence officer is that I think right now what we are seeing in the world and also in many, even in the advanced countries, is incremental benefit or incremental impact of AI. It is not transformational as yet because it has not got into the entire workflow. It is only some tasks which are getting automated. Once it gets into the workflow, then you will have a much wider impact play out. And how it gets into the workflow is what we need to watch out for, whether everybody's productivity is rising, or is it productivity improvement is getting concentrated in certain pockets. If everybody benefits from productivity improvement, then you'll have to work much less. And what Keynes had said 100 years back, that the technology will advance so much that you will have more leisure time. I'm still waiting for it, despite moving from a calculator to a laptop. I think I've still not got enough leisure time, that which Keynes was talking about. But maybe if it is done properly, but if it is not labor augmenting, it is labor replacing, then I think not only the routine jobs, but even the creative jobs. I think there was a strike in Hollywood last year, where I think the film makers were challenging. I mean, they were saying they wanted to put a lid on the impact of AI. So there is a risk there. I really don't know how it's going to happen, but as our economic survey pointed out, that it's the responsibility of the corporate sector to adapt AI or adopt AI in a way that it augments the workforce rather than replaces it. It's in their interest and in the national interest. So I think that's some kind of a message coming from there, that we'll probably need to be more careful about that. And this is happening at a time when we have a large labor force and we are not productively employing our entire labor force. And I think scale, education, I think all those things become very, very critical. So let me stop there.
Thanks, DK. Sporting enough, and thanks for saying we don't really know enough on this. Mr. Vats, you'll have the last word, the last question, maybe just a couple of minutes in terms of answer. The role of the private sector in India Inc., right? I mean, the folks sitting here, it will be interesting to know, how do you see the role of private entrepreneurs? And like I mentioned, the book, William Dalrymple, essentially spoke about the entrepreneurial spirit those times, and somehow, somewhere we lost that spirit. How do you see India Inc. really contributing to this entire story or the narrative of Viksit Bharat, Viksit society, or Viksit individual?
No, I think India Inc. has to play a big role, and I think some of the conversation we were having on just now, I think in improving productivity, one of the key things we need to do is to make sure that we are skilling, and I think the role of some of that skilling is also with India Inc. I'm happy to share that, on plumbers, we talked about plumbers and electricians. There is a Pidilite waterproofer and plumbing center for advanced skilling in Ahmedabad, which we just opened on the, basically to honor the 100th this thing of our founder. I think, but there is a lot more of this which needs to be done. I think as a society, we need to actually keep on, and we talked about this as well, value the technical skills as much as we value, and I think, and that too, the things which we do with hand. I think that's important. Things there where this thing which is not considered that good in India. And I think that piece has to work out. how Neelkanth and DK will react, how does it relate to inflation and so on and so forth. But I think how we pay them, the fact that we don't have nurses is because we start them at 5,000 rupees. I'm saying that is a challenge. So I think the point is we've got to manage some of these things parallelly. I think that's the piece which is there. But again, on a very hopeful note, I think formalization of Indian economy, which is something which has started, actually leads to better productivity. So basically this report also talks about, labor in formal sector is twice as productive as labor in informal sector. So I think that's a very interesting area. I think also working on curricula, and we did touch upon that, with industry. I think therefore that to that extent again corporate sector. But again there's the good news is that a lot of corporate sector themselves have jumped into education as well in a big way now. I think especially in higher education. And I think there could be some critics on another angle on it. But having said that, and Mr. Birla talked about BITS as a BITS acronym, which is one of the established institutions of your, but now today you have a lot of them. So therefore your ability to manage curricula, which helps people to come in more skilled to begin with itself, and do then more skilling as industry is going to be critical. And I think that's what will drive India as we go forward, and we've got to make our demographic advantage genuinely our demographic advantage. It can be worked on and it has to be worked on because we don't have an option. Because if we don't do that, then we have a problem. I think that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. I think we just managed to finish in time. These
Thank
folks
you.
look very happy. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, everyone, for your patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for deep diving into the Viksit Bharat roadmap. Before I invite Ms. Pinky Mehta to present mementos to our guests, I request Mr. Sudhir Kapadia to join our guests on stage also. Thank you. A huge round of applause for our panelists.
To express thanks. Thank you for your opportunity. Mr. Miller is such a concise. We are kept on his feet. He was just looking at it. Hello. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
It's actually happening most of the time. Thank you.
Wow, hold it before.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being a very patient audience. Now, all that stands between you and a very good dinner is our vote of thanks. So I request our Director General, Mr. Sandeep Khosla, to do the honors.
So I have just 3 pages of thank you. Jokes apart, I think we had an incredible day. We started off with the infrastructure conclave in the morning, sustainability in the afternoon, and ended with Pinky's welcome, showcasing our rich history and our achievements of the chamber and what we do currently, which is quite a lot under her vision. So thank you to her. Thank you to Mr. Birla for coming and gracing this occasion. Last 4 years, we have been privileged, right from Mr. Ajay Piramal to Mr. Uday Kotak to Rohit Java last year to now Mr. Birla. We've had visionaries come and guide us as to where we are and where we should be. So thank you to him. Thank you, Bala, for the fireside chat with Mr. Dinesh Khara. I think that was such a interesting topic where he's taken State Bank from SBI from where it was. And our Viksit Bharat, both the panel. So Sudhanshu, thank you. Dr. Shukla, thank you. DK and Neelkanth, all of you. And to the team who's worked on it, the same people, although Rajiv Anand, our senior vice president, couldn't make it today, and Indra Neelpal, both of them should have been here with us today, but urgently they had to leave for some other place. So, and thank you to our partners on Viksit Bharat, Aditya Birla Capital, L&T, and HSBC Bank. Thank you to the Bombay Chamber team. I think a lot of hard work has been put in by them. So, to our past presidents, 5 of them are here. I would like to acknowledge the support which they always give, right from Mr. Pradeep Malik to Ashok Bharat to Uday Khanna to Partha and Sudhir. We are privileged because I can call them anytime and anything which we need, they are always ready to help and hold our hands to take us forward. So as we finish our 188th year and 189th year starts, all that remains between me and all of you and the drinks and dinner outside is to say thank you to all of you, to our consul generals who've come here. Some of them have just gone to the next function, which is the Swedish National Day. But thank you all for remaining here. Our committee members, chair persons, and deputy chair of our various committees who always put this together. So I was telling somebody we do all 110 to 120 events in a year, which some of them were showcased today, and that wouldn't have been possible without all these people helping us. So thank you all once again, and please join us for cocktail and dinner. Thank you.